Forget what the catalogs promised. The Wild West didn't run on one famous bullet. It ran on hundreds of odd inventions. Paper charges that vanished in flame, rimfires that hissed smoke, pinfire shells that could ignite from a bump. These weren't props. They were survival choices. Could you load it in the dark? Would it foul before noon? Every cartridge told a story of buffalo hunters, scouts, and gamblers trusting powder more than luck. Today, we're digging up the bullets the frontier forgot, the strange, the short-lived, the ones that changed history just long enough to leave a scar. No myths, no legends, just powder, lead, and the truth of how the West was really armed. So keep your powder dry and meet the cartridge so risky, even carrying it could get you killed. Number 13, pinfire cartridges, the strange European round that almost changed the West. Before the West found brass and gunpowder harmony, it flirted with something far stranger, the pinfire cartridge. Invented in France by Casimir Lefaucheux in the 1830s, it looked like a normal brass case, until you noticed the tiny metal pin jutting out the side. That pin was the primer. When the hammer struck it, the pin slammed into an internal cap, setting off the charge. To frontier eyes, it was witchcraft, a self-contained bullet decades ahead of its time. Pinfire revolvers and shotguns flooded into the U.S. after the Civil War, imported by firms like Allen and Wheelock, and sold cheap to settlers heading west. You could find them in saloon drawers, on wagon trains, even tucked into stagecoach seats. But there was a problem. The same exposed pin that made it fast to fire also made it dangerous to carry. A bump against a buckle or saddle horn could set one off. Riders learned the hard way that a loaded belt could explode before the fight even started. By the 1870s, American makers abandoned the design in favor of safer rimfire and centerfire cartridges. The pinfire vanished almost overnight, a brilliant idea undone by its own fragility. A few relics still exist. Green tarnished shells found in ghost town dumps, the pins rusted flat with time. They remind us that innovation always comes with risk, and on the frontier, even your ammunition could betray you. Number 12, paper cartridges, the bullet that burned itself away. Long before metallic shells gleamed in cartridge belts, the West smelled of scorched paper and sulfur. Every percussion revolver, from the Colt Navy to the Army Dragoon, fed on fragile hand-rolled tubes of nitrated paper packed with black powder and lead. They burned themselves to nothing with every shot, leaving only smoke and the echo of a cylinder click. To load one, a shooter tore off the tail with his teeth, poured the powder into the chamber, and rammed the bullet home. The paper's coating helped it vanish in the blast, a self-consuming cartridge decades ahead of its time. But they were fickle things. Moisture ruined them, heat warped them, and a stray spark could turn a revolver into a hand grenade. Cavalrymen called that chain fire, and it was as bad as it sounds. Still, for a while, they ruled the trail. Faster than loose powder, easy to make, and light to carry. Waxed packets tied with string in a saddlebag beside the matches. By the late 1860s, brass had taken over, and paper cartridges disappeared with the smoke they made. Each shot erased its own evidence, powder, paper, and history turning to dust together. Number 11, 41, rimfire short, the gambler's last shot. It wasn't the loudest, the fastest, or the strongest round in the West, but in the right hands, it didn't need to be. The 41 rimfire short was the gambler's insurance policy, a tiny cartridge built for one purpose: to end an argument before it began. Introduced in the 1860s for Remington's double-barrel Derringer, it fired a small 130-grain bullet at barely 500 feet per second, slower than a thrown rock, but lethal at arm's length. In the crowded saloons of Dodge and Deadwood, that was all that mattered. The pistol slipped into a waistcoat pocket, light as a deck of cards. Some gamblers wore them on watch chains, others hid them behind breast pockets, ready to clear a table with one pull of the trigger. Newspapers called it the pocket equalizer. It wasn't meant for duels or showdowns. It was for cheats, drunks, and sudden revenge. Survivors rarely knew what hit them. Accuracy was miserable. The recoil popped straight back into the wrist, and at more than 10 paces, the little bullet dropped like a stone. But no one in a saloon gunfight ever cared about distance. By the 1890s, the .41 rimfire had faded, replaced by stronger centerfire cartridges and repeating pistols. Yet the Remington Derringer that fired it became legend, the secret weapon of gamblers, dance hall girls, and anyone who needed a last chance in a losing game. It was the smallest round in the West, but it left some of the loudest stories behind. Number 10. .44 Merwin and Holbert, the revolver round that vanished with its maker. In a century ruled by Colts and Winchesters, one company tried to rewrite the rule book and almost succeeded. Merwin and Holbert was a New York firm that promised perfection in pocket form. Revolvers with polished nickel frames, sliding barrels, and cartridges made only for them. Their flagship round, the .44 Merwin and Holbert, looked ordinary but wasn't. The case was fractionally shorter than a .44 Russian and rimmed to fit the company's own extractor system. It burned black powder clean and hit with respectable force, just enough to rival the early .44 Colt and .44 WCF. What set it apart was precision. Each revolver was machined so tightly that empty shells could be ejected by tipping the barrel forward. Live rounds stayed put, held by the cartridge's rim. Gun writers of the 1880s called it the gentleman's revolver, as smooth as a watch mechanism. But genius doesn't always sell. Merwin and Holbert's complex design cost too much to produce, and their ammunition wasn't compatible with anything else on the frontier. Dealers didn't want to stock a cartridge no one else used. When the company collapsed in the 1890s, its ammo died with it. The .44 Merwin and Holbert became a collector's ghost, a fine cartridge with no gun to feed it. A few cartridges survive, bright as coins in glass cases, the head stamp fading under museum light. They're reminders that even in the Wild West, craftsmanship could outshoot common sense for a little while. Number 9. .44 Russian, the foreign cartridge America ended up copying. The .44 Russian shouldn't have belonged to the Wild West at all. It started as a foreign order. In the early 1870s, the Imperial Russian Army commissioned Smith & Wesson to design a revolver that fired cleaner, harder-hitting rounds than the old black powder loads of the day. The result was the .44 Russian, a thick-rimmed, straight-walled cartridge packed with a heavier bullet and a tighter powder charge. It burned more efficiently, kicked less, and hit straighter. When the contract guns reached St. Petersburg, American shooters noticed. Frontier marksmen found the cartridge's accuracy exceptional, and handloaders along the Mississippi began copying it for their own six-shooters. By 1878, Smith & Wesson was selling commercial revolvers in the same caliber to anyone with cash, officers, lawmen, even a few outlaws who liked its balance. The .44 Russian became the first truly modern revolver cartridge in America. Its precision cases and cleaner burn inspired the later .44 Special, and decades later, the .44 Magnum. Few cartridges in history have traced such a perfect line from foreign experiment to frontier favorite. By the turn of the century, it was fading from holsters, replaced by easier loading smokeless rounds. But for a generation, it was proof that even in the roughest corners of the West, a little imported engineering could change the way Americans shot forever. If you're still here, you're clearly into the real mechanics behind the West. Hit that like button so I know to dig up more of these forgotten designs. Number 8. .44 Evans, the bullet that fed a 28-shot rifle. Some cartridges made history through war or fame. The .44 Evans earned its place through sheer audacity. It was born in Maine, not the West, in the workshop of Warren Evans, a dentist who decided to build a repeating rifle like nothing else on Earth. His rifle used a helical magazine hidden inside the buttstock, feeding rounds forward on a spiral track. To make it work, he needed a special cartridge, short, bottle-shaped, and packed just right to fit 28 of them in line. The result was the .44 Evans, a clever little round loaded with black powder and a 275-grain bullet. On paper, it looked perfect for settlers. High capacity, decent punch, and no reload needed until the fight was over. Frontier scouts and a few buffalo hunters tried them, impressed at first, until the flaws showed. The feeding mechanism jammed easily, and the odd cartridge shape meant no other rifle could use it. Ammunition had to be ordered directly from the factory in Maine, which might as well have been another continent away. By the late 1870s, the Evans Rifle Company was bankrupt, and the .44 Evans disappeared with it. A handful of rifles and cartridges survive in museum racks, their spiral magazines frozen in time. They're relics of a moment when one inventor thought capacity could outshine reliability, and learned that even in the West, too many shots could still add up to none at all. Number 7. 32-20 Winchester, the cowboy's small game load. Small, practical, and annoyingly useful. The .32-20 was the round cow hands reached for when dinner mattered more than dueling. It started as a hunter's and farmer's answer, a modest centerfire cartridge, light enough for a revolver, but potent enough in a rifle to drop coyotes and feed a camp. That versatility made it a frontier multi-tool, a single caliber that could live in a pocket pistol for evening town work and in a carbine for the trail. In the hands of a rancher, a .32-20 Winchester rifle meant one less trip to town. In the hands of a working cowboy, it was for varmints, small game, and the rare close-range defensive shot. Not glory, just food and survival. Ammunition was cheap, recoil was mild, and reloads could be handmade at a small-town smithy if the supplies ran thin. That practical charm was also its weakness. At anything beyond a few dozen yards, the little bullet sagged and lost energy. Against an armored buffalo or a charging man with a repeating rifle, it was useless. But those limits didn't matter to most users. They measured calibers by utility, not bravado. By the turn of the century, faster, smokeless factory rounds and more specialized centerfires edged it out of military and big game roles. Yet for decades, the .32-20 quietly threaded through ranch life, a dozen cartridges in a belt loop, a pocket revolver for trouble, and a short rifle that could keep a family fed. It never made legends, it made meals. And on the plains, that's a kind of legend all its own. Number 6, 50-70 Government, the Buffalo Hunter's stopgap. Before the mighty .45-70 took over the frontier, the plains echoed with something even heavier, the 50-70 Government. Born in 1866 for the newly converted Springfield trapdoor rifles, it was America's first official centerfire cartridge. The Army wanted a round that could recycle Civil War muskets into breech loaders, and the result was a bruiser, a half-inch bullet over 70 grains of black powder. It hit like a hammer and could drop a horse or a man with a single shot. When surplus rifles reached the frontier, buffalo hunters and scouts snapped them up. The 50-70's long brass case carried raw power at the cost of punishing recoil. A practiced shooter could punch through a bison's shoulder or a wagon plank at 200 yards, if he could stand the kick. The cartridge wasn't elegant, but it was everywhere. On the plains, soldiers carried it for the 1866 and 1868 Springfields. Hunters loaded it in Sharps rifles, and settlers kept a few rounds tucked into old pouches just in case. The sheer size made reloading simple. Pour, seat, and shoot, and brass casings could be reused until the next split. By 1873, the Army switched to the lighter .45-70, which shot flatter and cleaner. The 50-70 lingered a few more years among civilians, slowly fading as buffalo herds disappeared and smokeless powder rose. Today, the cartridge looks almost prehistoric, thick, heavy, and overbuilt for its time. But in that short window between war and wilderness, it gave the frontier something new, the feeling that a single shot could decide everything. Number 5, .44-77 Sharps, the cartridge that built the buffalo rifle. Before the Sharps became legend, it needed a cartridge worthy of it, and that was the 44-77. Introduced in 1869, this was the first American-made bottleneck rifle cartridge and one of the first to bridge war and wilderness. Its case held 77 grains of black powder behind a .44 caliber bullet, packing enough punch to tear through a buffalo's ribs or an oak fence post. To the hunters who followed the herds across Kansas and Dakota Territory, it was the perfect tool. Flat shooting, devastating, and reliable. Sharp's rifles, chambered for the 44-77, became the professional's choice on the plains, used by men like William Buffalo Bill Cody and the crews who supplied meat for the railroads. But black powder has limits. After a few shots, the heavy fouling crusted barrels and dulled accuracy. Hunters complained that the 44-77 lost power past 300 yards. As cartridge technology improved, longer cases like the 45-90 and 50-90 stole its thunder. By the mid-1870s, the 44-77 was already fading, but its reputation was sealed. It proved that precision at distance mattered as much as raw power, and it turned the Sharp's rifle into the symbol of the professional buffalo hunter. Few cartridges shaped the early West so directly. Each one carried enough powder to end a hunt or feed a camp, and enough smoke to mark the slow extinction of the great herds. Number 4, 45-75 Winchester, the cartridge that couldn't keep up. When Winchester unveiled its grand new lever-action rifle in 1876, it needed ammunition worthy of the celebration. The answer was the 45-75 Winchester, a fat, bottlenecked cartridge built to give repeating rifles the punch of a single-shot Sharps. On paper, it was a marvel. 75 grains of black powder pushing a .45 caliber bullet at speeds unheard of for a lever gun. It could drop a buffalo, knock down an elk, and cycle fast enough to fight off a bandit raid before a single-shot rifle could be reloaded. The Model 1876 chambered for it looked unstoppable, but frontier shooters soon found its ceiling. The heavy cartridge strained the rifle's toggle link action, and the short case limited how much powder it could really burn. Compared to the Sharps or the Springfield, its power was more promise than performance. The brass itself swelled in hot barrels, sticking during long volleys. Still, it earned loyal followers, including Theodore Roosevelt, who carried a 45-75 on his early hunts. For a brief few years, it was the frontier's prestige round, loud, fast, and proud. Then came 1886. Winchester's stronger, redesigned rifle fired longer, cleaner cartridges like the 45-70 and 50-110. The 45-75 became obsolete almost overnight, the victim of its own ambition. Today, its cartridges sit in display cases, short and thick, reminders of a time when Winchester tried to bridge the gap between elegance and brute force, and learned that in the arms race of the West, evolution never waited long. Number 3, 56-56 Spencer rimfire, the Civil War round that won the frontier. Before the Winchester lever action became a cowboy icon, another repeater carried the weight of a nation, the Spencer. Its cartridge, the 56-56 rimfire, was crude by later standards, but revolutionary for its time. A short, fat case holding 45 grains of powder behind a .52 caliber bullet, it gave soldiers 7 quick shots in a world used to 1. When the Spencer hit the field in 1863, Union cavalrymen suddenly had more firepower than any army on earth. After the war, thousands of surplus rifles followed their owners west. Farmers, scouts, and settlers bought them cheap, and the 56-56 went from battlefield to buffalo range. On the frontier, it wasn't just a weapon, it was insurance. Each metallic cartridge was self-contained, weatherproof, and simple enough to load from horseback. The round's range was limited. The big bullet dropped fast past 100 yards, but close in, it hit like a sledgehammer. Soldiers at Little Bighorn, Pony Express guards, and wagon escorts all relied on its brute stopping power. By the 1870s, ammunition makers introduced slimmer, more efficient rimfire designs, and the 56-56 disappeared with the rifles that fired it. Yet for a brief window, it changed everything. It turned the repeating rifle from a curiosity into a standard and proved that volume could win a fight before accuracy ever mattered. In the end, the 56-56 didn't just win battles, it opened the West one cartridge at a time. Number 2, 44 Henry Rimfire, the cartridge that made the Winchester a legend. If one bullet earned its place in every Western museum, it's the 44 Henry Rimfire, the cartridge that turned the lever-action rifle into a legend. Designed in 1860 for Benjamin Henry's repeating rifle, it was one of the first reliable metallic cartridges ever made. The brass case held 26 grains of black powder and a 200-grain lead bullet, fired by a rimfire primer instead of a percussion cap. Simple, sturdy, and self-contained, it gave the shooter 16 quick shots without touching powder or paper. On the battlefield and the frontier alike, that changed everything. Union troops carried Henry rifles at Shiloh and Allatoona Pass, pouring out firepower at a rate no musket could match. Out west, the same ammunition armed settlers, scouts, and stagecoach guards. In 1866, Winchester improved the design with stronger brass and a sealed case, birthing the famous Model 1866 Yellow Boy. The 44 Henry wasn't perfect. Its short case and modest powder charge meant it lost punch beyond 200 yards. But no one cared. Speed and reliability won the day. A man with a Henry could fire 16 shots while his opponent was still ramming home his second. By the 1870s, bigger cartridges replaced it. Yet its reputation never dimmed. It proved that repeating rifles were the future and that firepower could change history. Every Winchester that followed carried its DNA, and every cowboy movie ever made owes it a debt. Because before the Peacemaker, before the 45-70, there was the Henry and the little 44 that made the West echo. Number 1, brass-cased shotgun shells, the round that ruled them all. Before smokeless powder or plastic hulls, the West's most trusted ammunition wasn't for a rifle at all. It was for a shotgun. The brass-cased 10 and 12-gauge shells were the workhorse of the frontier. Tough, reloadable, and easy to seal against dust or rain, they fired everything from fine birdshot to heavy buck. A single box could feed a homestead, a stagecoach guard, or a sheriff's scattergun. Hunters loaded them with powder, wad, and shot by hand, crimping the mouth with candle wax or tallow. When the charge went off, the empty case could be cleaned, reprimed, and fired again, sometimes dozens of times before the brass split. For settlers far from supply towns, that reusability made the difference between eating and going hungry. Stagecoach guards favored them for close-range defense. Lawmen kept them behind bar counters. Even cavalry scouts carried cut-down whippets under saddle coats. The shell didn't care who pulled the trigger, it just worked. By the 1890s, paper-hulled shells began to take over, lighter to make and cheaper to ship. But the old brass cases endured deep into the new century, shining like gold against the grit. No other round defined frontier life so completely. It fed, defended, and sustained the West, a single cartridge that united hunter, outlaw, and lawman alike. If one bullet built the Wild West, it wasn't cast from lead or jacketed in steel. It was brass, broad, and booming, the round that ruled them all. 13 cartridges, from paper and pin fire to brass and buckshot, each one a reminder that the West was built on invention, not legend. Every round told a story, survival, progress, and the endless race to make the next shot count. Some vanished overnight. Others changed the world. The truth is simple. The frontier wasn't won by the men who fired the guns, by the ammunition that kept them alive. If you've made it this far, you're the reason real history still gets told. Hit like, share it with a friend who loves the Old West, and subscribe, because the next story fires even deeper into the weapons history tried to forget.